Hello and welcome to the Bhagavatam. Today we're going to be reading from the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is going to be chapters 1 to 3. So it's the subject, and if I was to try to create a theme for today's talk, is going to be about Leela. And Leela is something very fascinating. Leela is something that we are all engaged in. We are all engaged in a story, a pastime. And even though we don't think of it as such, even though we think that this life is, this ongoing event, nevertheless, when you look back at it, you'll realize it's all a story. Try looking back 5 years, 10 years of your life, and you'll realize time doesn't exist. It's only here. The memories, the photographs, the videos that you've captured in your mind and now on your cell phones or computers, wherever. But the ongoing story of our life is what we narrate again and again and again every time we meet somebody new. If you were writing a book, you'd write about your story. If you were introducing yourself, you would talk about your story. Your story is extremely important to you. And yet it is only the story of this life. You've had many lives. You've had thousands, maybe millions of lifetimes. And all those stories have been forgotten, just as this one will be forgotten too one day. Why are we having this Leela? Why are we having these stories? Why is this going on? Why are we immersed in this? And why does it matter? Because everything about this story of our lives is an intrinsic part of our evolutionary process. We evolve and grow through each of our stories, and if only we would stop and instead of being so immersed in the story, take out the lessons as we go. Look at the pearls, the jewels, the nuggets of wisdom that we are gaining through all the experiences we have, instead of getting bitter and hurt and sad and angry. I mean, those things are natural, of course, they will happen. But as you move through your emotions, if you can pull out the essence of how this is part of your spiritual journey and where it can be used, the energy of those events can be used to better the quality of your life and improve your spiritual growth, then you will have turned this story into something powerful and meaningful, a legacy that you will leave behind for the generations to come. Now, the story of our life, however, is something that is, as you know, transient. But there is an eternal story that we're all part of. Just as everything we are, our form, our nature, our qualities, everything we seek for in this life, whether we seek happiness, whether we seek love, whether we seek knowledge, whatever it is we seek in this world comes from an eternal source. In fact, everything we're seeking is an indicator about that source. We seek knowledge because within us lies a fountain of knowledge that we never knew we had. When I began writing, I discovered this. I didn't know the things I was writing. They were not here. They were not part of the world. They were not part of what I had read. But there was a fountain of knowledge, a wealth of wisdom lying within that I had never been aware of. No one ever told me how to access. You have it as well. Our search for knowledge, therefore, is leading us back to that source. And this source is connected to the Supreme Source, the Divine Source, or God, who is the internet of all wisdom, and from that consciousness, everything unfolds down to us, and from us back to Source, to God, to consciousness. Once we begin to see this connection, this interconnection, this interplay, we get into a very fascinating understanding of life. that everything we've been seeking for, happiness, love, they were all unable to be fulfilled in the world. We would find it. We would find things that made us feel good, pleasures of the world and so on. But they were temporary. They never lasted too long. We might find love in the world, but it never lasted. To find that lasting, eternal love is a process that most people do not know how to do. They think it is to be found by reading some books, but not really. They think it is to be found in a religion. Not really. Religion will teach you processes. It will teach you ways. But ultimately, love is a matter of the heart. And the heart cannot be, you cannot access the heart through the head. You have to let go the head. You have to let go your knowing. You have to open that channel of the heart. And it is there that you will find the eternal love that you've been looking for. A lot of people think that that eternal love is self-love. Well, no, that's just the beginning of it. That self-love is you're beginning to understand that there is a particle within you called the self, not the ego, the self, which is naturally radiant, naturally peaceful, naturally loving, naturally happy. And it never stops being that way. It's always that way. And then you begin to realize this is but a tiny particle of the infinite source or God. And then you realize, my goodness, how much greater must that be? How much greater and more amazing and wonderful must that source or God be? And then if you go still further, you begin to ask, what is the nature of that God? What does God do? What does God look like? What is God's Leela? And now you've come to the real question. Today in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're going to hear about God's Leela. We've talked about that a little bit. Today we're going to go just a little further and a little further. Finally, it'll be in the 10th canto. Today we're in the 3rd canto now. So in the 10th canto, you'll come across the full-blown Leela of Krishna. And for those of you that are new and haven't heard of Krishna, Krishna means the all-attractive one. God is by nature all attractive, which means there is no force, there is no compulsion to want to be with God. Just that when you see and behold and understand that wonderful form, those wonderful pastimes, you just fall in love. It's like when you meet someone for the first time, you talk about your stories. And the more you hear about their stories, and the more you hear about them and their nature and their personality, and the more you see them and listen to them, the more you fall in love. So falling in love with God is a similar process, a process of listening, a process of understanding all the different aspects about God. The more you begin to walk on that journey, the more in love you find yourself. So with that, let's get started with the Bhagavatam today. The Bhagavatam 3rd canto. And today we're going on to the 1st chapter. So earlier, right in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, if you've been with me for that entire process, you would have heard about the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is this tremendous literature that was written by Vyas, also at the same time as the Gita and the Bhagavatam, 5,000 years ago, around 3000 BC. And he was talking about the people of that time. So in that he talks about a king, King Shantanu. And this king died, well, at a very young age, and left behind 2 sons, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. And they were married, but these 2 sons also died at a very young age. Now you've got a kingdom with no male heir. You have the Queen Mother Satyavati, and she's in a pinch now. There's no heir, there's no one to sit on the throne, and she didn't feel quite. There have been queens who've sat on the throne, but she didn't quite feel capable of that. So she called for her son Vyas. Now Vyas is the author of all the Vedas, one of the most learned, wise, intelligent beings of that time. See if I can pull up a picture of Vyas. There you go. Yeah. And so he was an incredible spiritual teacher and author. And he had been compiling all the Vedas, and now his mother, Satyavati, calls him to perform she has a certain request from him. She wants him to impregnate the two widowed queens, Ambika and Ambalika, and to bear sons from them. So he does. Now, Ambika did not like the look of Vyas. He was very, ashen countenance and very unpleasant to look at, let's just say, really ugly, okay? He was wise, but he was very ugly. And so she closed her eyes while he was having sex with her, and the son that was born, Dhritarashtra, was born blind. Then there was another son called Pandu, and this was from Ambalika. And Ambalika, when she saw Vyas, her face became ashen, like pale. What the hell is this? And so her son Pandu had ill health. Now, after this first encounter with Vyas, the Queen Mother said, we should have one more child. Both these kids are not in the best shape. So she wanted Ambalika to have one more encounter with Vyas. And this time Ambalika quietly snuck her maid in. And so the maid ended up having sex with Vyas, and she bore a son called Vidur. Vidur was extremely wise, because this maid, she had not been afraid of Vyas. She didn't care how he looked. And the son that was born was incredible. So in all of this lesson lies a great lesson about our consciousness. If you're about to bear a child, if you're about to have sex for the purpose of giving birth to a child, it is very important to watch out for your consciousness at that time. Your consciousness will determine the kind of child you will attract into your life. It's a very important point to note. I remember the time when my daughter was born, there was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of calling on God that if you're going to have a child, I would like it to be someone who will be of service to humanity, who will be here to contribute to the welfare of this world. You spend so much time taking care of a child. You want that there is some value that they bring, at least based on our understanding of life. So we want to bring a child into this world who will bring and contribute something that is of value. And with that in mind, I too engaged in that prayer. And my daughter has been the most amazing person in my life. So with that, we find out now that the story moves further. The king that was now, so one of those children, Pandu, he died very young and left behind 5 sons. The other, who was blind, went on to become the king. Now this king, unfortunately, there's a sad story about him, because he was not only blind physically, but he was also blind in other ways. He was blind under the influence of impious desires to nourish his dishonest sons, it says. So basically he was very insecure, and his sons, he wanted to please them. And he wanted to give them whatever they wanted. Didn't matter if it was right or wrong, good or bad. You know how some parents are? They'll give their kid anything. They just want to win the popularity contest with their child. They just want to give them whatever it is the child wants. Hey, that way you're going to like me, you're going to love me, and I'll just do whatever it is that pleases you. Not necessarily what's best for the kid. And that's what happened with Dhritarashtra as well, the blind king. And so these sons of Dhritarashtra tried to kill the 5 sons of Pandu. Remember, there was another brother, the older brother Pandu, who died at a young age. So they tried to kill, the sons of Dhritarashtra, of the blind king, tried to kill their cousins. First, by trying to set fire to their vacation home. Imagine going on a vacation and someone tries to kill you while you're there. They managed to escape, of course. Pretty tragic when that happens. Then they tried insulting and dishonoring their wife, Draupadi, right? And that again set up a whole chain of events. The insulting, the abuse of Draupadi. And this is where Krishna stepped in and saved her. But otherwise they were going to disrobe her in the court, right in front of everybody. Again, a series of very tragic incidents by which this Dhritarashtra and his sons, Duryodhana and others, were trying every which way to kill or humiliate the sons of the in the case of the kids, their cousins. Then they unfairly defeated them in gambling and took away their entire kingdom and exiled them to the forest for 13 years. And after all that, they refused to return it to them. So even though they complied with the consequences of losing that gambling match, they still would not give back the kingdom. Then Krishna tried to explain to them, tried to put sense into them. Nothing worked. Ultimately, there was the battle of Kurukshetra, which you heard about when we studied the Bhagavad Gita. Then Vidura, the younger brother of the blind king Dhritarashtra, tried to counsel his brother. And he told him, Dhritarashtra, you are maintaining offense personified. Your son Duryodhana is envious of God, and as a result you are devoid of all auspicious qualities. Relieve yourself of this ill fortune as soon as possible and do good to the entire family. But can you imagine? When we love our kids, if anyone speaks badly about them, what happens? We get enraged, we get angry, we get upset. We don't want to hear anything about our kids. And so it was with that blind king. Although he was meant to be a king and be fair and just and look at what was best for everyone, he was blinded by his infatuation for his own children. So at that point, the king's eldest son Duryodhana became swollen with anger, and he said, who does this uncle of mine think he is? Who asked him to come here, this son of a kept mistress? He is so crooked that he spies in the interest of the enemy against those whose support he has grown up. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leave him with only his breath. Anger. Right? When someone speaks ill of us, we feel angry. And when we are angry, we say all kinds of things. In our anger, we can be very nasty. We can be very mean. Our words are very much out of control. But one of the big things the Vedic literature teaches us is that we need to learn to control our senses, our words, and ultimately our mind, our thoughts. Yeah. Until we do, there is very little chance we will progress spiritually. Spirituality is not just about some airy-fairy, pie in the sky kind of things. Oh, we're just, we're going to do la-di-da and have some crystals and have some fun and, dance and sing. And no, those things are nice. But really, it's about learning to discipline ourselves, to train ourselves, to train our mind, our words, our ego, to bring it all under control, because what needs to be in charge of us is not our mind. Our mind is not a capable entity for running this organism. The capable entity is lying within us, dormant, the soul. And it is the awakening of the soul that will ultimately change our lives. So all spiritual teaching is about getting us to that point where our soul awakens. And when it awakens, we now have a higher power within us that is capable of controlling the mind, that is capable of guiding it and letting it know what is right and what is wrong, what is beneficial and what is not. Without awakening the soul, none of that is easy to, it's almost impossible to do. You say, how do I awaken the soul? Because you may or may not believe that the soul exists, but if you do the experiment of meditation and if you take the time to quiet your mind, you will experience your soul. You will experience a peace that arises from nowhere. Why? Causelessly. You will experience a joy that comes from nowhere. You will experience wisdom that arises from nowhere. You will find yourself dealing with the world, or rather not being affected by the world in the way you used to be. You will no longer be caught up in being envious or angry or hurt or sad. It's almost like you've developed a whole different way of dealing with the world. And that way of dealing with the world is so profound and such a life-altering experience that people almost do not believe you're for real. You've got to be kidding, they'll say. That's not possible. But it is. It actually is. It alters your consciousness. As the soul awakens And as the soul begins to be the one running the show, we're able to stop and question our mind. We're able to challenge it. We're able to look at what it's doing. We're able to observe it and make wiser decisions. Right? So if that's the direction you want to go with, you don't want to belong to that camp of Duryodhana and the blind king Dhritarashtra, but rather you want to be on the camp of Vidura. So when Vidura was insulted, what did he do? Did he sit back and cry? Did he get offended? Did he get hurt? Did he get angry? No, he did something entirely different. He decided that he would leave. And here's how it describes it. Vidura, being pierced by arrows through his ears and afflicted to the core of his heart, placed his bow at the door, and quit his brother's palace. He then traveled alone throughout India, visiting hundreds of holy places of pilgrimage. Oh, by the way, to travel the way he would have done at that time would not have been in a car, nor on a horse, nor in a horse chariot. When people went on pilgrimage, they went on foot. They traversed hundreds of miles on foot, and with no belongings, just probably a pot or something that they could carry with them, some kind of a small little vessel in which they could beg for alms and maybe receive some food from somewhere, because they clearly don't have a kitchen and they don't have all the spices and all the ingredients and grocery stores with which to go. They would just go wherever somebody would feed them. They would go house to house for bhiksha. Bhikshus are also found in Buddhism, but they were originally there in the time of the Vedic culture. So they would get food in that way and survive and then travel to all these holy places. Now you might say, well, what's so special about these holy places? Are they really holy? What's holy about them? Well, one of the things that happened in these holy places is Leela. There's usually been some incredible pastimes of either Krishna or Shiva or any of the other highly evolved deities that are there, Durga and so on, and people go there because their energy is very vibrant in that place. In fact, you can feel it. In fact, I've been to so many of those, and I can tell you, there is nothing like it in the world. That energy, that experience is unlike any place you will go to. So therefore, people go on pilgrimage like that, and in those pilgrimages, they're able to find a greater connection with God. Now, for many years, Vidura traveled like this, many years. And in his travels, one day he met with Uddhava. Uddhav was the constant companion of Krishna. But by the time Vidur met with Uddhav, Krishna had left this world. And when Vidur asked him about the welfare of all his family members and about Krishna and about Krishna's family, Uddhav was very, very much in a heartbroken state. Uddhav, being reminded of his dear friend Krishna, he had been like Krishna's buddy. They'd hung out together, they'd spent lots of time together. When he was reminded of his dear friend Krishna, he began to feel anxious and was unable to answer immediately. He had loved Krishna ever since his childhood. Now in his old age, Uddhav, having spent many years with his beloved friend and being separated from him, felt a deep ecstasy as he remembered Krishna's lotus feet. Uddhav's body experienced ecstatic symptoms as he wiped away the tears of separation from his eyes, arising from his extensive love for Krishna. This experience of ecstatic love is woven through all the Vedas. You will find this with all of the personalities who developed love for God. They developed an ecstatic experience, having experienced which there was no going back to anything mundane. Nothing of the world appealed anymore. Think of it like this, that when you have experienced the highest pleasure of all, the highest ecstasy of all, the highest love of all, there's no going back. Everything else looks like child play. Right? So therefore, that which we call detachment from the world comes naturally. It's not something that needs to be imposed on someone. It's not something that needs to be artificially done. It's not about wearing some robes, and it's not about leaving the world. It's about the world leaving you. And when the world leaves you, when your consciousness has reached that level, then at that time, you're just in a different place altogether. You're here, but not here. You're in this world, but not of this world. And at that time, that ecstasy when you're in connection with the divine or with God, when you remember His Leela and pastimes, it just takes you to a whole other experience. So that's why we're beginning that process now to hear about those pastimes. Because as it said in an earlier verse in the Bhagavatam, as the presence of God begins to fill you, as you hear about Him, as you begin to understand Him, as that presence begins to fill you, you find yourself transported out of the control of your mind. Something that may have seemed impossible in the early stages now becomes possible. So, Uddhav said, "My dear Vidura, the Supreme Being Krishna, the sun of the world," the sun literally, like the sun of the world, has set, and our house has now been swallowed by the great snake of time. What can I say to you about our welfare? The universe with all its planets is most unfortunate. Why unfortunate? Because Krishna is no longer there. So one who has experienced that, for him, though, everything is now meaningless. And he continues, and even more unfortunate are the members of the Yadu dynasty, that's Krishna's family, the Yadu dynasty, because they, even when he was here, could not identify Krishna as the personality of Godhead, as the Supreme Being, any more than a fish can identify the moon. So his family members thought of him just as an ordinary person. They thought of him just as another one of them. Oh, great, maybe powerful, maybe all of that. But not God, can't be, not possible. How could this be? The Yadus, his family members, were all experienced, learned, and expert in spiritual matters. They were always with Krishna, but they were only able to know him as the manifestation of the all-pervading divinity. They could not understand him as he is. So this happens a lot. It happens a lot that we are in touch with someone who may be very highly evolved, but we don't recognize them. Sometimes in your own family, even if you're a more highly spiritual person, you may find that your family members don't necessarily see the depth of your spirituality. They don't necessarily understand who you truly are. Maybe they even think it's ridiculous or stupid or, craziness on your part. At least I know I experienced quite a bit of that. But they don't necessarily see you for who you are. And there's many people. You'll walk around in the world and you'll find most people, if you have advanced spiritually, cannot understand where you're at or what you go through or the kind of experiences you're having. And even if you tell them, they're like, man, I don't know. They become doubtful because they haven't experienced it. But when you meet someone who has experienced the same thing, now this is satsang. You get together with a like-minded person and you're able to share the truth of that higher cosmic experience that you've had, that experience of the divine or God. That is satsang, this gathering together of like-minded people sharing sat, or the truth, the absolute truth. So we now want to come back and see how is it that these people weren't able to understand Krishna, though they were learned. So just being learned is not enough. Just having engaged in various yoga practices or having gone to temples and mosques and churches and all the kinds of places of religion that we go to is not enough. It's not enough for us to really understand who is Krishna. For that there needs to be jigyasa, a thirst, a longing, a desire to know the ultimate reality. And when you have that and when you will not settle for less, then it shall be presented unto you. And you will get exactly what you're seeking. So Krishna came to this world in his eternal form, which is just suitable for his pastimes. These pastimes were wonderful for everyone, and his transcendental body is the ornament of all ornaments. So these are some pictures I'm going to show you of Krishna for you to be able to appreciate. This is Krishna, baby Krishna, sitting on the lap of his mother Yashoda. He's holding in his hand a flute, and you'll see on his head a peacock feather. And then this is Krishna with Radha, his beloved, his eternal beloved. Most people do not understand who is Radha. They think she is just some girlfriend of Krishna's. No, she is the feminine aspect of God. God has both masculine and feminine aspects, and Radha is the feminine aspect of God. She is not talked about as much because the knowledge of Radha is very gupta or secret, and is only available to people at a higher level of understanding once they have gone through some of the more basic fundamentals of the philosophy and so on. But then as you come into the understanding of Radha, you begin to understand the supreme ways of love. Therein lies the great mystery of bhakti or devotion. And on this path of bhakti, there is no greater teacher than Radha. And there is no greater lover than Radha. And there is no greater being than Radha. So, the personality of Godhead, the all-compassionate controller of both the spiritual and material creations, is unborn. Krishna says this in the Gita too. He says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, and never will there be a time when we shall cease to be. So he says the personality of Godhead, the all-compassionate controller of both the spiritual and material creations, is unborn. And yet, when he appeared in this world, most people did not understand who he is. Even the demigods, when they assembled for the Rajasuya sacrifice performance by King Yudhishthira, they thought Krishna was the ultimate dexterous creation of Brahma, the creator of human beings. So in the Vedas, God does not personally do anything, does not create. Creation is delegated to Brahma. And so most of the demigods, the highly evolved beings that had come to attend the sacrifice by King Yudhishthira, thought that Krishna was just maybe the most incredible creation of Brahma. They could not understand who he really is. When Krishna first appeared to his parents, they were in a jail. They had been imprisoned because the king, Kans, had been given a prediction that their child, the child of Krishna's parents, was going to kill him. And so he'd imprisoned them, and he was killing off all their babies. Finally, when Krishna was born, the parents became really worried. Oh, Krishna, Kans is going to kill you, they said to the baby. And the baby said, don't worry. Well, he's a baby, but he's able to talk. So that's the difference with God. He came fully decorated with his peacock feather, with the ornaments, with all of that. And he says, no, don't worry. And he showed them who he really is. He showed them the form of Vishnu. So they would understand, that's what you're seeing standing up, the four-handed form of Vishnu. So that they would understand that nothing was going to happen to their baby. At that point, the gates of the prison opened, and the father, Vasudeva, was able to take the child out of the jail and to safe haven, with a friend of his, Vasudeva, who just also had a baby, but they lived across the river, so he had to cross the river. And just as you see in the story of Moses, there is a whole story here of how the river parted to let Vasudeva cross along with baby Krishna on his head. Krishna's appearance started with the prayers of Brahma, the creator of the universe, when he prayed to Vishnu to incarnate for the welfare of the earth. Now, here we are with Vasudeva being afraid of Kans, who has put him in the jail, and he takes Krishna across to the home of Vasudeva and Devaki. of Nanda and Yashoda. I'm so sorry. He takes Krishna across to their home and leaves baby Krishna there with them. And there Krishna was brought up in the cowherd pastures of King Nanda, and there he lived for 11 years like a covered flame. Right? So his real light was hidden. And he lived there along with his brother Balaram or Baladev. In his childhood, the Almighty was surrounded by cowherd boys and calves, and thus he traveled on the shore of the Yamuna River through gardens densely covered with trees and filled with vibrations of chirping birds. So once again, to take a moment, we'll go over to the image here of Krishna along with his cows and his friends in the background there. And so Krishna's love affair with the cows begins from there. During his childhood, one moment, actually I missed something. Although he is unborn, yet he took birth in the prison of Kans. Although he is fearless, it appears as if he left his parents in the prison in Mathura and went to Braja. Although he is unlimitedly powerful, yet he apologized to his parents for his inability to serve them due to being away from them for all those years. That's when he finally came back to rescue them, because of a great fear of Kans. And so Uddhav, who is narrating this, says, all of this behavior gives me pain at heart. Now he's wondering, why would that which is unborn take birth? Why would that which is fearless leave his parents in the jail and go somewhere else as if he's afraid? And why would he then come back and apologize to his parents, saying, I'm so sorry, excuse me for this inability to protect you for all these years? Now, what's the deeper reason for that? The deeper reason is Krishna has his Leela, his pastimes, and he does them in the way he does them. He understands his own logic and his own reason. Perhaps this was the time that he was to be with Nanda and Yashoda and all the cowherd people of Vrindavan, to engage in the Leela, the pastimes that would occur out there, and in all the mischievousness of Krishna and all the fun stuff and all the romantic stuff that had to happen. That was not part of the way in which his birth father and mother, Vasudeva and Devaki, related to him. Everybody has a different relationship with God. Some people have a very formal relationship with God. For them, God is great. We bow down before God. We consider God as almighty. And then for some, God is one of us. For those who lived in Vrindavan, Krishna was one of them. He was just this adorable little kid they loved. They didn't know that he had shown his parents the four-handed Vishnu form. They didn't know that he was an incarnation of God. They didn't know any of these things. They found miracles happening. There were all kinds of miracles that were occurring. We'll talk about them in a few minutes. But they could not have guessed that this was other than just a beloved ordinary child. Well, an extraordinary but beloved child of theirs, right? So that's a different kind of relationship. That's an intimate relationship with God, in which we do not see God as great and ourselves as small. We see ourselves as one. Many people talk about wanting to experience a oneness with God. Oneness with God comes when you are intimate with God. Then you are intimately part of that Leela of God. So you are no longer looking at God as something out there in the clouds or some place in heaven, but you're looking at someone. This is someone you're going to sing and dance with. This is someone you're going to play and frolic and have fun with. And that's what you begin to see in the Leela of Krishna, is that that's the kind of relationship the people of Vrindavan had with him. Also, Kans, the king who had imprisoned Krishna's parents, birth parents, had to go through a certain peak state of achieving, of really, we call it filling the pitcher of bad karma or sin, of really doing horrific things. And then Krishna would personally intervene to take him out. So, leaving his birth parents there, letting Kans do what he was doing, inflicting harm on others, was all part of a divine plan. Eventually, Krishna kills Kans with his own hands and frees his parents from the jail. But we'll get to that in a bit. And then Vidur says, who, after smelling the dust of his lotus feet even once, could ever forget it? Simply by lifting his eyebrows, Krishna has given the death blow to those who were burdening the earth. All the evil people that were there at that time. Wiped them out. During his childhood, he was only visible to the residents of Vrindavan. Sometimes he would cry and sometimes laugh, just like a child. And while so doing, he would appear like a lion cub. While herding the very beautiful cows and bulls, he who is the reservoir of all opulence and fortune used to blow on his flute, and thus he enlivened his friends, the cowherd boys. It's a picture of Krishna and his brother Balaram taking the cows out. And they would take the small ones, the babies. The big cows were taken care of by the adults. Even those who hated Krishna, these are the people who, there were many demonic beings that were sent to try to kill him. When the king Kans knew that this person who was supposed to kill him is born, that's Krishna, he tried to have Krishna killed. He sent all kinds of really horrific personalities out there, people who could shapeshift and take on, different forms to try to kill Krishna. But Krishna ended up killing them all. So it says here, even those who hated Krishna achieved success in yoga that yogis aspire for through various practices and through many, many lifetimes. Even they achieved liberation. Who can tolerate separation from him? Certainly the fighters, now he switches over to the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where they were in a battle and Krishna was the chariot driver for Arjuna. Certainly the fighters on the battlefield of Kurukshetra died while seeing the lotus-like face of Krishna, so pleasing to the eyes. They too achieved the abode of God. And that's a scene from the Battle of Kurukshetra, where Krishna is about to attack Bhishma, though he had promised he would never do so. How shall I take shelter of one more merciful than he who granted the position of mother to Putana? So there was this she-demon called Putana, who had come on behalf of the king Kans to kill Krishna, and she had put poison on her breast. And when she came to Krishna, she came looking like this wonderful, beautiful woman. And everybody thought, oh, she's so lovely. She's come to feed Krishna milk. How wonderful. But she'd put poison on her breast. And her intention was to kill Krishna. What Krishna did was, even there as a baby, few days old, he sucked out her life air, her prana, and gave her liberation. She died, of course. So Vidur is saying here, Uddhav is saying, I consider those demons who tried to kill Krishna and who are inimical toward him to be more than myself, than a devotee, because while fighting with him, absorbed in thoughts of enmity, they were able to see him. Very often we misunderstand and we think that people who are averse to God, atheists let's say, are somehow doomed and not going to advance spiritually, and we feel very sad for them. But the reality is something else. Atheism is as much a religion as any other religion is. There's a fanaticism to it. If you hate God or you love God, the center of your thinking is still God. So whether those people hated him or whether they loved him, all of them got the benefit of thinking about God. And that's the power of God. It's not just that those who are good go to God, but even the evil person who is hateful of God, despises God or God's devotees, gets free liberation by simply meditating constantly on God. You see, it's a very powerful thing. However you touch, you get burnt. When you touch fire, however you touch it, it doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are. Whoever touches fire gets burnt, right? So it is the same with God. Whoever touches God becomes liberated, becomes elevated, becomes cleansed and purified, and comes back to God. So that is the point that Uddhav is making. So he says, the great wizards who were able to assume any form were engaged by Kans to kill Krishna, but in the course of his pastimes, Krishna killed them as easily as a child breaks china dolls. And why is all this important? Because as we meditate on God, as we begin to understand his Leela and his pastimes, we begin to give a name, a form, activity to God. We begin to form a relationship with God. God is no longer now some nebulous pie in the sky, not just some light, not just something esoteric, but rather something very tangible. The more we hear about him, the more we begin to realize how adorable and charming and wonderful he is. The inhabitants of Vrindavan were perplexed by the great difficulties they were experiencing because a certain portion of the river Yamuna was poisoned now. Now different developments were happening. The river was getting poisoned by a great snake, Kaliya. And when that snake came, Krishna chastised the snake by jumping into the water and dancing on his hoods. Now, we talked about this last time, I think. Let me... There we are. Right. So, Krishna danced on the hoods of Kaliya, tired him out, and then eventually Kaliya apologized and went away. And then Krishna brought all the cows, because he purified the water of the river that had been poisoned, and brought the cows to drink there and proved that the water was back again in its natural state. The Supreme Being Krishna desired to utilize the opulent financial strength of his father, King Nanda, for worship of the cows. And also he wanted to give a lesson to Indra, the king of heaven. Some people have said to me, and maybe this was last time, that perhaps when some people think of God as angry and wrathful, maybe they're talking about Indra, because Indra is angry and wrathful. He's considered the king of heaven. That is the heavenly planets. So the spiritual world is considered to be beyond heaven. Heaven is just within this physical creation. It is the highest of the planets, therefore very highly evolved beings there, and so on. But beyond the physical creation is the spiritual world. And that's the abode of Krishna. Anyway, the king of heaven, Indra, was very proud and arrogant, and Krishna wanted to teach him a lesson. So he told his father and all the village people to stop worshipping Indra, because Indra supposedly provided rain. And they said, you know what, stop worshipping him. And the father said, no, but we've always done that. That's part of our thing. We got to worship Indra. He says, no, don't worry. Indra got really mad seeing this, and he started sending all kinds of rain and thunderstorm and typhoons and all kinds of stuff. And Krishna simply went and picked up a hill, a huge hill. Actually, it's about 14 kilometers around, or about 10 miles around if you walk there now. And he put it on his little pinky and held it up for 7 days. Okay, so you may say, wow, that's pretty amazing. But that's Krishna lifting up Govardhan Hill. And he asked everybody in the village to come underneath that and made it like a giant umbrella. And he protected everyone from the wrath of Indra by doing this. And then finally Indra came down and apologized to Krishna for his big mistake. And in this way, so many different things occurred that, were troubling to everyone. And yet at the same time, Krishna would rescue them. Then Krishna also enjoyed himself as the central beauty of the assembly of women by attracting them with his pleasing songs in an autumn night brightened by moonshine. And so the gopis, the cowherd women of Vrindavan, all came running out into the forest to listen to his flute and then to dance with him. And these are the scenes from there, the Rasa Leela dance. And when Krishna was with them, he became, like with each and every one of them, there was a separate Krishna. So if there's 108 of them, there's 108 Krishnas. Each one thought that Krishna is only with me. And because of that, they became a little proud and arrogant. And at that point, Krishna left them. They were left looking for him everywhere, bereft, upset, sad. So there's so many pastimes, so many things. Then after all of this, Krishna went to Mathura. As he was older, around 16 years of age, he left the town of Vrindavan, went back to Mathura where his birth parents were. He went along with his brother Balaram and then actually killed the king Kans and freed his parents from the jail. And from there on, he stayed with his parents and went on to study in a school under the tutelage of Sandipandi Muni. And when his guru, he just basically heard the Vedas once. Now the Vedas are hundreds of books, but he heard them once and just knew them instantly. So the guru was like pretty amazed. You're just a great student, he asked him. Because Krishna was trying to be like a normal person, just try to show that he's doing the same things everybody else does and, follow the practices of the world. But there, Sandipani's son had died, the guru's son had died, and Krishna then brought him back from the realm of death. And the guru was most grateful for getting his son back. Then Krishna went on to form his own kingdom in the place of Dwarka, which was an island off the west coast of India. It then has sunk in recent times, and then they've found it now. So you'll actually see videos and you'll see all kinds of photographs of excavations where they've gone underground, and not under the water, under the ocean, and they've found the remains of Krishna's kingdom. So to that kingdom, then he brought Rukmini, who he married. She's known as the goddess of fortune, and although her brother did not want him to marry, Krishna ended up, they fell in love with each other. He saw Rukmini and Rukmini saw him. They fell in love with each other, and the brother was opposing, so Krishna picked her up, put her on his chariot, and together they rode off while the brother tried to chase them. Similarly, there was a story of the princess Nagni Jiti, and there too, there was an open competition. Krishna won the competition, and yet all the other suitors who had come wanting to marry her, they tried to fight with him and were defeated. In this way, Krishna had, before I go to that, there was one more case. There was a demonic person called Narak Asura. And he was trying to gain great mystical powers and try to, capture the entire sky, it is said. But ultimately there was a fight between him and Krishna, and he was killed. Then Narakasura's mother prayed to Krishna, called him to her house, and Krishna returned the kingdom of Narakasura to his son, to the son of this person, Narakasura. But at that time he came across all the princesses that this Narakasura had kidnapped. There were 16,100 of them that he'd kidnapped. And when they got to know of Krishna, they came and begged him to save them. They said, no one else will marry us now that this person has kidnapped us. They'll say, well, we don't know if she's virgin or not. That was a big deal in that time. And she's been with some other man and nobody will marry us. So they said, all of us have heard of you. All of us have talked about you incessantly, and we're all in love with you. We would like you to accept us as your wives. Krishna never says no to anyone who's in love with him. And so he took all of them back with him to his island of Dwarka and made for each of them separate palaces where they were all individually housed. And with each of them, he ended up having 10 children. So 16,100 times 10, I think that's 160,000 kids. So if you think this is fantastic, think of this. God loves everyone. And when you form a relationship with God, that relationship could be one of friendship. It could be one of servitude. It could be one of having God as your father, but it could also be one of having God as your child. But it could also be that of being a romantic lover. Or you may want to be married to God. These were all people who wanted to be married to God. And so he accepted them all at the same time. See, everything is possible for God. It's not about some fantastic tale. It's about understanding this simple fact that everything is possible for God. There's a scene of Krishna with his wives as he returns back from one of his travels. All right. And then Vidur goes on to talk about all the different kings and both the enemies on both sides of the battle of Kurukshetra and how they were killed in the battle of Kurukshetra. But all of them who were so powerful and so strong, he says here that the earth would shake as they traversed the war field. All of them were wiped out. When the powerful Duryodhan, bereft of his fortune and duration of life, lay on the ground dying, his thighs broken, he was not happy. Krishna was not happy to see what had finally happened. But that was the price of cleansing the earth of all the horrific things that had been happening here. We're in a time like that again today, and some people say, well, maybe he'll come again, and we hope for that. So yes, now finally, when all these kings were wiped out too, the final challenge was for Krishna's own family members, the Yadus, who had also become very powerful, would also become very arrogant, to be wiped out. So then Krishna arranged another Leela, which would cause the downfall of the Yadu dynasty. And since there was no one left to destroy or vanquish them, since everybody else had been vanquished, all the other warriors at least, they had to end up killing themselves. And that's what happened. They ended up getting drunk and they quarreled among themselves, and under the influence of intoxication, they ended up killing each other. All this was part of Leela. All this was part of the pastime to eventually take his entire family back with him. Krishna had come with his entire entourage. And the idea was to go back with all of them. So then he put Yudhishthira on the throne and saved Parikshit from the weapon fired by Abhimanyu. Anyway, by the son of Drona. All right. I think with that we'll end. And I'd like to throw it open for all of you to see if there's any questions, to see if there's anything you'd like to ask. Some of you have put down questions, so I'm going to take a look at that. All right, let's take a look. I first just want to let everyone know I'm so grateful for all of you being here. Thank you. Most grateful for your presence. Most honored that you've been here with me and hearing the Bhagavatam. I know that I am a very tiny individual. There are people who understand this text far better than I do, who can explain it far better than I can. But I hope that this serves as an introduction for you, that may you in time find someone who can take you even deeper and deeper into the deepest depths of what this Bhagavatam has to offer. Sisi is asking, what is the significance of the peacock feather that Krishna wears? Sisi, to me, I do not know. I really look at it as a style statement, something that makes him stand apart. Instead of wearing a big fancy crown, Krishna chooses to wear a peacock feather. It's also because of his love for animals and a love for nature, and in many ways a love for life. So I think there is something about that. There may be something further, and I would love to hear anyone else's take on that, but I certainly don't know of anything beyond that. Cindy has a wonderful question. Cindy asks, would you consider young children, let's put this over here, Would you consider young children to be atheists as they have no concept of God? They are not perplexed by a conscience of what is or is not. They simply seem to be a pure expression of the Leelas. Cindy, thank you so much for that incredibly wise insight. Yes, when it comes to children, they are already clearly in their divine nature. They do not have the egoic mind. The egoic mind is not developed as it is for the rest of us. So they are, you see, just as what happens to us in meditation, as we start to gain control over the mind, and as the mind calms down and is no longer running the show, our soul emerges, our natural playfulness, our natural loving nature, our natural way of compassion, our natural. So we don't have to develop these qualities. They are already inherent within us. Our natural joyfulness emerges. Children already have that because for them, they're already in a meditative state, except for when they have their needs not met. So then the only way they can communicate is by crying, or by throwing a tantrum, if that's the only way they'll get your attention. But ultimately, it is about being able to just be the full expression of who we are. So return to childlike state is very much a part of a person evolving spiritually. It is a natural part of that. They are, as you said very rightly, engaged in their Leela already. And for them, it's a very natural place to be, just living and enjoying and celebrating life. We can learn a lot from them. I've often said people think that our children come to us for us to educate them and make them adults. I believe differently. I believe our children come to us because we've forgotten how to live. They've come as our gurus to teach us how to be alive again, how to be fascinated by everything, how to be curious about everything, and how to be alive. That is the most important thing we can do for ourselves. So, I love your questions. If there's anything further, tell me. Or if somebody would like to speak up, I can unmute you and you can come on. Anybody on the Zoom call want to have a question? All right, then let's end over here. I wish you good night and Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna. I will see you next week. Jai Shri Radhe, Shyam.